If you're new to the video and filmmaking world, all the pieces of gear available can be quite overwhelming. There's cameras, lenses, shotgun mics, clip-on mics, wireless mics, gimbals, drones, big lights, small lights, and at least a million different modifiers. And then you're also seeing all your favorite YouTubers and content creators running around with these nicely decked out camera rigs with the million different accessories, more lenses than you own t-shirts, and every single light that Aputure ever made. But let me tell you that to build a successful career as a videographer or filmmaker, whatever you want to call it, you need far less gear than you might think. So in this video, I'm going to tell you my top 5 pieces of gear that I use to generate roughly $200,000 in revenue. At number 1, we have this. A camera that can shoot 4K at 50 frames with a decent 10-bit codec. Something like my Sony a7S III, which is recording this video right now. So I'm using my trusty a7 III as a placeholder. There is a few reasons this is going to help you make money. The 4K footage will help you in a lot of different ways. First of all, you can crop into your footage and still be left with a frame that has decent resolution. You could go up to 100% crop and still be left with a full HD image. This comes in very handy in run and gun type situations where you simply do not have the time to nicely set up every single shot, which from my experience happens at least once or twice every single shoot. The 4K footage allows you to crop the image to make the framing just a little bit nicer. Good old fixing it in post. The 4K footage also comes in super handy whenever you're shooting talking heads, which in commercial filmmaking is basically all the time. Because now you can shoot 2 angles with just one camera. Well, technically it's not 2 different angles, but by setting up your camera for a medium shot, you could easily crop to a close-up shot in post by just cropping your image about 50%. This basically gives you 2 different angles and enables you to cut seamlessly between different parts in the interview without people noticing. And it just makes the thing overall more interesting. Of course, this would work even better if you just had a second camera shooting the close-up angle natively, but if you're just starting out, honestly, the one camera method works just fine. The last advantage of being able to shoot a proper 4K image is social content. Reels, TikToks, Shorts, we're talking vertical video. It's everywhere and chances are that your client is going to want some sort of social content, whatever you're shooting for them. And even though I'm not a big fan of shooting horizontal and vertical video at the same time, it is doable if you set it up correctly. The advantage of being able to shoot in 4K here is that if you go ahead and take your beautiful cinematic horizontal footage and cut it into a vertical format, you are going to lose a large portion of your frame, which also means you're going to lose a large portion of your entire resolution. By shooting in 4K, we make sure that whatever portion of our frame we are going to crop out, we are still going to be left with a somewhat decent looking image. Now, just to be completely clear, all of those tricks also work with 1080p footage. But if you were to do them with 1080p footage, you are much more likely to encounter a visible loss in quality, which will also be visible to normal people or clients. Next up, we have the 50 frames per second, or 60 frames per second if you're from the US. The main advantage of being able to shoot with 50 frames per second is that you are going to be able to slow your footage down by up to 50% without it looking choppy. Slow motion usually just looks very cool, which is an easy way to impress clients. For example, if you're shooting sports. But it honestly also comes in super handy when you're shooting boring corporate stuff and the location just really isn't it. Because seeing someone write something down or typing something looks a lot more fancy than it actually is when you put it into slow motion. Shooting in 50 frames also saved my ass numerous times when the client, for example, wanted to change the music after the first draft, or God beware, mid-project. It also helps a ton when they suddenly in the 8th feedback loop decide that there is a shot that they do not want to have in the video anymore, but your timeline is basically completed. Because now you can just go ahead and stretch some some of the other clips by a second or two by slowing them down, and everything's going to be fine. And lastly, the 10-bit codec. For the sake of this video not being 30 minutes long, I am not going to go into much detail about what 10-bit 422 actually is, but put into simple terms, 10-bit 422 simply gives you more information and more colors to work with, and also has noticeably less compression, which also in very simple terms means that your colors are going to look richer and that you are much less likely to encounter things like artifacting and noise. The reason this will help you to make money is because you are going to be able to deliver better looking videos to your clients, even though you were shooting in suboptimal conditions, which, like I said a few minutes back, is going to happen more often than not. Moving on to number 2, we have this. A proper mid-range zoom lens. Now this is the Tamron 35 to 150 f2 to f2.8. I've picked this lens up roughly 4 months ago and I've been loving it so far. Prior to this, I had the Tamron 28 to 75 f2.8 and I used that lens for around 5 years. And throughout those 5 years, I shot about 90% of all my work, photo and video that is, on that one lens. Having a versatile mid-range zoom lens that on the wide end of the focal length is able to get you roughly a full view of the location you're shooting in, and on the close end is able to get you that nice shallow depth of field cinematic look is honestly all you ever need for most jobs that you're going to encounter. The times where a job really requires you to shoot on an ultra wide lens, a super tele lens, or shoot something at f1.4 are honestly not a lot. So a lens like this is going to help you make money because once you have a lens like this, or even just the 24 to 70 like I had before, you will be able to take on 90% of all work available. Coming up at number 3, we have this, a proper wireless microphone. Now this is currently missing a few pieces because I'm using the second transmitter and the receiver to shoot this video right now, but what you're looking for is a wireless microphone that has 1 receiver and 2 transmitters. Now I'm using the DJI first gen microphone, and notice how I have not yet upgraded to the second generation because the first generation is basically doing everything that I wanted to do just fine. So there is absolutely no need to upgrade some of your gear just because there's a newer version available if there's no certain need for it. Now I use these in every single job I do in one way or another. If I'm shooting social media content, which I don't do a lot, but it happens from time to time, I just take one of the transmitters, which also has a built-in microphone, use the little magnets they come with and clip it onto their shirts just like this. And the audio is going to be just fine for social media purposes. If I'm shooting something where 2 people are talking to each other, I will simply put one of the transmitters on each of my protagonists. That way I'm going to have 2 separate audio channels for both persons, meaning that I am not relying on them being super close together, so I get both of their audio on one single microphone. And then if I'm shooting sit-down interviews, I will simply take one of the transmitters and hook them up directly into my Sennheiser shotgun mic, kind of like I'm doing right now. Even though for sit-down interviews I would have the mic on a boom and then the transmitter will wirelessly send the audio straight back into the camera. Or I'll simply attach a small lapel mic to one of the transmitters, then attach the lapel mic to the shirt of my interviewee and have them put the transmitter into their back pocket. This is by far the easiest way to get good audio in a bunch of different situations. Next up we have this bad boy, a good light. And when I say a good light, what I mean by that is one good light. Because from my experiences, in most cases, one light is really all you need. I just recently shot a fairly big project in Ireland, and for the whole production, I did not use a single light. All I used was natural light. When I first started getting into video, I thought that to be a professional, you would have to set up lights for every single shot. But let me tell you that as a solo filmmaker that is not running massive commercial productions, this could not be further from the truth. And if you learn how to utilize and shape natural light, you will be just fine shooting the majority of your work with natural lighting. And for those situations where you need artificial light, one light in the 200 to 300 watt range will get the job done just fine. I started out using a Godox SL60, which is like $100 or something, and even that got the job done for most cases. You're going to use that one light as a key light for your interviews, as a source to make otherwise boring shots a little bit more interesting, or to simply brighten up the frame if it's just a little bit too dark. Get yourself a decent softbox and you will be good to go. I personally started out using a medium Profoto umbrella because I already had that from my photography work. And just recently did I upgrade to an Aputure Light Dome 3. And last but not least, we have a drone. Now, right from the get-go, I was never the biggest fan of drones, because I felt like whenever these became mass products, people started using them just for the sake of using them, and not because a certain shot was calling for the use of a drone. But do you know who loves drones? Clients. Clients just love seeing their office buildings being shot from high up in the air. And starting their corporate videos with some nice aerial landscape videos will make them feel like they actually got a Hollywood level production. The reason I bought this drone in the first place is because I had a client job where the client required that there would be drone shots in the videos. So I went out and bought a used Mavic 2 Pro for I believe $1,000 in 2021. So like 3 years after it actually came out. And I've been using it ever since. And when it comes to directly correlating money earned to a single piece of gear, this thing easily takes first place. There have been jobs that I have only gotten because I'm able to fly a drone. And there are also jobs where the entirety of the job was to fly a drone and take videos or photos. And this is also the only piece of equipment that I can charge extra money for. Now, I charge a flat fee for all the equipment that I bring, but I charge money for this on top of that flat fee. This is because everyone understands that this is an additional expensive piece of gear. And then also it needs extra insurance, and in Europe, at least if you want to fly this completely legally, you will be required to get a license, which is another time and money investment. And I have never had a client complain about the fact that I will charge extra if I'm flying my drone. So when it comes down to linking revenue to a single piece of equipment, let me tell you that this thing is the Tom Brady of camera gear. And there you have it. These are my most important pieces of gear to make good money as a solo filmmaker. And to further elaborate on the reality of this, let me show you a few real-world examples with budgets and the gear I used for them. Athlete portraits for one of the biggest German sports organizations. Budget was about 13,000 euros, not including traveling expenses. I used one camera, 3 vintage lenses that cost around 300 euros combined, my drone and no light. A branded storytelling piece for a grocery wholesaler. Budget was around 15,000 euros, again not including traveling expenses. I shot 80% of it on one camera and one lens, used a second camera for the interviews, I used my drone, and one light for 5 or 6 shots out of around 80. Another branded storytelling piece for the same wholesaler. Budget was around 8,000 euros this time, again not including traveling expenses. I used a second camera for the interviews, but mainly only one camera and the same 3 vintage lenses. I used my drone and no light at all. Except for the production in Italy, where I had an assistant with me that was shooting a B camera because we literally had to shoot different scenes at the same time, I did all of these projects completely by myself. Now I do want to add that there's of course a lot of other stuff that you're going to need as you go. Stuff like additional batteries, cases, a backup camera, some filters, and a lot of other good stuff that is going to make your life a lot easier. But I want you to be aware of the fact that you do not need to spend $10,000 right from the get-go just to get started. I started out only using my Sony a7 III and the Tamron 28-75. And then gradually over the last 3 years, every time I felt like I was missing a crucial piece of equipment for a certain shoot, I went out and bought the best bang for your buck solution. Of course, there's 1 or 2 things where I feel like I could upgrade to those in the future, but those are more quality of life upgrades for myself rather than being things that a client is actually going to notice. I really hope this video will help a few people overcome the anxiety of starting a career in the video industry, show you that you do not need a buttload of expensive camera gear just to get started, and maybe even be a guide as to what piece of gear you should be buying next. If you found this video helpful, I would greatly appreciate if you hit the like button or even subscribe to the channel, as it helps me out a lot. Now go tell somebody you love them, and see you in the next one.